Welcome back to Breaking Down the Bear. This is episode 5 called Pop.
I don't really know. I'm just and then I use the remainder to make like a play on an XO sauce, like a Chinese XO sauce, but like using the remainder.
That doesn't look like fennel, though.
Right? Yeah, that's what's like cool about it. I was like,
The over convoluted, like, is it good? Like, do you want to eat it? Is it delicious? With everybody wanting your food and your concept and your approach to have like a philosophy or a meaning or a story, you can lose the forest through the trees, if you know what I'm saying. And I think there's this really old interview with Grant Achatz where he's basically talking about, because like, think about somebody who is like story and technique and manipulation to the nines. Alinia's food does not even look like food to most people. And Grant is in this interview and he's talking, I don't know if it's a menu meeting or whatever it was, but he was talking about like deliciousness has to come first. And I think the combination of being able to see everybody else's food with like globalization and social media combined with like guests having that, preference, talking about the fact that like, well, what makes you special? What makes you stand out? I find and I see it leading to a lot of like overcompensation in chefs sometimes where like it needs to be a million things to a million people. And that's the quote, right? If you appeal to everybody, you appeal to nobody. And Sydney's absolutely falling into that camp. I fall into this camp when I'm writing my menus sometimes. I'm like, well, I want to do this and it's really simple and I know it's going to taste good, but like, what else can I add to it? Sometimes when you're writing a dish, if you can kind of approach it with an editor mindset more so than a creative mindset, that can help, right? Because the more you remove, when you get to a point when you look at the dish or the presentation and you say, there's nothing else I would remove from this. It's like, then maybe it's done versus like, I need to add this and I need to be able to give this spiel at the table. And it's like by the 2.5 minutes are done, the dish that you just presented to the guest is cold because you needed to give all this context for what you just cooked to make sense. And it causes other unproductive second order effects, right? You need additional equipment. You need additional serviceware. You need additional meetings with the staff. You need to spend more time doing demos with people. Or in Sydney's case, she's saying, yes, we're using all of this waste. And yes, that's a very noble goal, but you have to store the waste. You have to pay for the labor to process the waste. I went to this really interesting talk when the Mad guys did a whole talk in LA. They flew this chef out from London. He runs a restaurant called Silo, and he put this really interesting graph up on screen of how their operations of their business break down. And labor is absolutely the highest, and ingredients is actually the lowest. And I do want to be clear, for the record, don't get it twisted. I am not opposed to having a philosophy or planting a flag or trying to make a change in the world or trying to have an identity for yourself. But when you're doing it just to tick the box, or you're almost wearing it as a costume, versus like actually embodying it, that I find can cause more harm than good. And so that's why I'm trying to call it out here in this case.
it's a lot. I'm seeing now that it's a lot.
You said it. 6 weeks out, let's go. Skipping school, this Ibram guy. Knife roll on his back, cigar in his mouth. I feel like there's a whole character deep dive on him that would give us more insight into why.
Yo, T.
What's up, T?
Jeffrey.
Yeah.
You have an extra knife lying around? I need a good one for school.
Yes, just over there on the bench.
Ooh, brutal. You got a new knife as part of your knife kit. Why do you need another knife as part of your thing? Because the knives that they give you for your culinary school usually aren't that great. We talked about that in that episode, but man. And maybe I'm reading into this a little bit too much. Over 1 million people watch this video on TikTok. A lot of you disagreed with me on this. Is this an example of somebody in the kitchen finally getting to the point of asking Carmen to borrow his knife versus just borrowing it and then having it fall on the ground underneath the lowboy? Good question.
Jeffrey.
Yo,
This is your knife.
yours, chef.
I don't have a cool story like this of a chef ever giving me their knife, but I've had it happen with spoons before, which is kind of a special feeling because spoons are also like spoons and knives. Most people don't really hold that much sentimental value to tweezers because they usually aren't that expensive and they aren't like old. And so they don't have any sort of identity. Most people's tweezers are relatively the same, but this is a special moment to have a piece of gear passed down to you from a chef that you respect and liked working for. And again, I think it puts that whole dropping the knife scene full circle for me. Correct me if I'm wrong. And as cool of a moment as this is for Tina, I think this is also like a really interesting moment for Carmen when he's thinking about the fact that like, I can just give this knife because I'm in a different chapter and different season in my career. He's not even thinking about knife cuts and being on the line and prepping. He's thinking about how can I set up the line and get the right equipment and lay this out in the right way where I can work for my team and make sure that they have everything that they need to be set up for success. It's one of the reasons that I have that video on the channel where I advocate for calling yourself a chef sooner than what most people people would say that you should call yourself a chef at, because once you get to the level where Carmen is at, you're not really cooking anymore. You're not holding a knife as many hours as you were when you were on the line. You have to think differently. You have to adopt a different skill set. The level of responsibility has changed. And so it should be no surprise that I'm like a big fan of this pay it forward kind of moment in the show.
Let's go. Bring it home.
Okay, now when it comes to doing actual timing on the line, this absolutely exists. And you can see this in the small independent restaurants scaled all the way up to like big corporate locations when they're really trying to like operationalize everything, because saving 13 seconds here or 4 seconds here or eliminating a step there across like a franchised organization, like a chain of restaurants, can save so much money throughout the course of a year. I have absolutely heard of stories of making sure that every single station is set up as intentionally as possible when you're thinking about a from the ground up kitchen design, because maybe think about it in the opposite way. If anybody's ever been in a kitchen where the layout is not conducive to doing the menu or the prep tasks or the dishes that are on that menu at that particular time, it is so frustrating. It's not fun. You feel like you're wasting steps. And I think a lot of chefs harbor this mentality of like, if I had the opportunity to redesign my kitchen now that I know what I know about what our execution looks like, I would change this, or I would move this over there, or I would not include this in what our kitchen has. This is a fun moment, getting to pick out the more like tangible culinary related details to, again, we're starting from scratch. We're not having any of the hand-me-downs or the inherited forks and spoons and knives and bowls and plates. We get to choose what we want the plateware to be at this restaurant. Depending on if you're working with like a small maker or if you're working with like a large company that has like a bunch of samples they can bring in and show you, you'll usually have somebody come out, or they'll ship you a giant box of all these things like bubble wrapped and plastic wrapped, and then you can lay them all out. You can touch them, you can see what the weight is. Because yeah, realistically, the orders that we're talking about, like I worked at a restaurant where like the opening order for just cutlery was over $100,000. And for whatever reason, like cutlery in particular is like a offender here, where it doesn't look that good on a website. Like regardless of the level of quality of product photography, it just doesn't compare to holding it in your hand and seeing like, dude, where do fingerprints show up? You don't know how the weight and the balance feels in your hand. Like, is the handle too thin and flimsy, or is it pointy, or like not beveled in the right spots? And then there's some things you just aren't going to know until like you get them in use. Like, how does this wash, and how's the wear and tear going to hold up over time? How does it polish? How does this pair with like the tables, if they're set on the tables, or with the tablecloth or the linens that we're using? How does this look next to the plates that we decided on? Does this actually work with the storage solution that we have for the serviceware? If we have drawers that things are going to pull in and out of, is this really annoying and it doesn't stack for some reason? And a lot of times the way that a dish gets served can often be influenced by the plate or the vessel that it's going into. And so this step of the process really matters.
Like freaking the fuck out, like he's throwing it at hyper speed or some shit like that. It's fucking crazy.
That is classic Logan, man. You are fucked up.
I might be reading this scene wrong, but what I take from both of these scenes, both Tina going out with her culinary school classmates and then Carmen being at this house party, is just the like awkwardness that you feel hanging out with quote unquote normal people. Because in a lot of respects, the work that gets done when you are either starting a restaurant or working at a restaurant, especially on the finer dining side of things, there are so many parts of it that are not normal. The hours, the attention to detail you spend on things that most people just couldn't be bothered to care about. It makes it very hard to connect with people or to empathize with people who have like a desk job, or people who just like don't take pride in their work or don't see their job as something to like constantly improve at. And it's like when you are in that season of your career where you're like pouring everything into food and cooking and being a chef, you're so in your own bubble. And then it's only in situations like this that you can acknowledge like, oh my goodness, there is a world outside of this thing that I spend so much of my time on. And listen, it's not to say that one way is right or wrong. Don't get it twisted here. I'm just acknowledging the fact that like you spend so much of this time sacrificing, and if and when they were to get a star, Carmen would show up at this party and everybody would be like, oh my God, this is amazing. But when you're in that building phase or like the Rocky cutscene, nobody cares that you're in your Rocky cutscene. And that Rocky cutscene could last years. And I just haven't seen this played out in other shows, or at least industry shows, in this way before. So I wanted to call that out. One last thing that stands out to me about this scene, and I'm trying to find a way of how to word this, but it's like, and I'm making kind of a generalization, but when you're hanging out with people who like cannot wait to leave their job, I'm not even saying that Tina or Carmen like particularly love their job, because you hear a lot of the like, I would never suggest anybody else be a chef kind of quips coming from people like Carmen. But when you're hanging out with people who like, they just leave their work at work and they can just go and be social after that, or they go and do their leisure activities, when for these guys like Carmen and Tina, everything, the work is all consuming. You get into these environments and people are like, yeah, do shots with us, or like, yeah, let's stay out later or whatever, not understanding the fact that you need to be able to perform tomorrow. You need to be able to go and make decisions tomorrow. And for people, again, who don't have that investment in their careers, it can often like be at odds with one another. And it's like, oh, you're too stiff, or go, come on, like you're too uptight. When in reality, it's like, I have this thing that I've poured so much of my heart and soul and time and resources into, and I can't get drunk tonight because I can't be a good person tomorrow for the thing that requires me to be a professional. And then that starts to feed itself, right? Because you're less likely to go out to parties and be social and have friends and foster relationships. And again, I'm not saying there's a good or a bad or a you should do this element here. I'm just trying to acknowledge the dynamic that I certainly felt at certain stages in my career.
Call me.
I should have called
We
you.
don't need to call you if everything is fine.
Everything's not fine.
Everything is fine.
Hi. I'm Claire. Sorry to interrupt.
Sorry, this is, sorry.
I ended up marrying someone who is not in the industry. That was just my preference. That's how I wanted it to be. And I think that this is a very interesting test to someone who is not a restaurant, hospitality, front of house, bartender type person. It's like when you bring them into the circle and they see the chaos and they don't happen to like shy away from it or break down or not want to hang out with you anymore. I think you kind of need that if you're the chef and you want this person to kind of like be with you in that relationship dynamic. It's not to say that your potential partner needs to have a change of heart and all of a sudden want to work in a restaurant, but I would say they at least need to get it and understand it, because it's not for everyone, and you receive judgment and criticism from enough places working in food, and having your partner also harbor a little bit of that towards you. I don't know. I couldn't do it. And so that's why I like this also resonated with me a lot.
Everybody, thank you for today. It was a great day. Go home.
Quick additional shout out to the Scandinavian homies, because that is a phrase that you say at the end of the day in particularly Scandinavian kitchens. You say "Tack Furry Dog," which is basically thank you for today, where it's basically like this sentiment of, regardless of if it was good or bad, thank you for being here. Thank you for showing up. Thank you for your effort. Thank you for your contribution, for being involved. And I'm going to see you tomorrow. And I don't know. I don't think I brought that back. And I was like, every single day with my team, I'm going to get to the end of the day and say thank you for today. But there was absolutely times when I would say it, because I think it's just a nice like punctuation mark at the end of the day. It's an expression of gratitude. Does it always hold the same meaning if you're saying it every single day? Maybe, maybe not. But I think it's nice to hear Carmen say something like that. And I can only imagine they wrote that as a line for him with that intention to kind of reference Tack Furry Dog.
All right.
More Richie cutting corners. What are we going to do about Richie?
Over here, and then right by you here, we have the oven, stovetop. Garde-manger is kind of...
Garde-manger, basically the larder station is what it was most commonly, like if you were to translate it, it's like the head of the larder. And what that basically means is like a lot of people will separate kitchens into the hot side and the cold side. That's often talked about. And you can try this for yourself when you go out to a restaurant. You can look at the menu, especially if it's a restaurant similar to what they're kind of making at the Bear here, and you can see what dishes might be coming off of a garde-manger station. So it's a cold presentation. It is something that's pre-prepped and just gets placed on a plate. Think of like your salads or your hamachi crudos. The pickle plate, the sliced charcuterie, those types of dishes come off of a garde-manger style station. And sometimes, depending on the size of the kitchen and the size of the staff, sometimes some of the pastry section and the desserts will come off of that station as well. And what's nice about a garde-manger station is it can be kind of set up anywhere in the kitchen. They just need a countertop to plate and usually like a fridge to hold the cold things. Contrast that with something like the hotline, where you hit some constraints, right? The number of pots and pans that can be on a stove, or the number of racks in an oven. Or as you see with what Carmen's been obsessing over, the amount of of real estate you have and the number of moves you need to make to move something that is hot from here to here to here in the kitchen. It's also just a fantastic progression for people too, because the technical proficiency you need to work a hotline where you're trying to nail protein temperatures and you have saute pans on, or you're putting things on the grill and you need to make sure they don't get burned, having somebody start on a garde manger section where things are pre-prepped and service is more about just assembly, that can prep them to have all of the principles and the skills really internalized, so when they do get onto the hotline, they can juggle additional things.
Ideally, in a perfect world, we would be able to get a dish from station to station in like 5 seconds.
This is hard because in a lot of respects, the movement around a station and the way that you organize a kitchen setup and where you put the appliances and the spacing between countertops and stuff like that, that's why you would traditionally time yourself. I kind of mentioned that earlier on in this episode. When you talk about shaking a dish and passing it from station to station, it's like, that's not actually how plating works, especially in this type of kitchen setup environment. You get all the mise en place passed up to the pass, the plate goes down, everything gets assembled, and then that plate gets passed up to the expo station where it ultimately gets handed off to a server, and then it goes. Trying to maybe say this another way, all of the components get brought to the pass where the plating is happening, whether that's a tray of garnish or a saute pan or a pot of sauce or a pot of risotto, and then all of that gets assembled, whether you're picking up 4 plates or 8 plates or 16 plates, all in one location. Compare that with what I think Carmen's trying to outline here, which doesn't make any sense to me, where it's like, it's going to start on one station and they're going to put the endive down, and then they're going to take the dish and they're going to pass it to the next station, and they're going to put the pork belly down, and then they're going to take the dish and they're going to pass it down to the garde manger station, they're going to put the watercress on it, and then it's going to go out. That's not how anybody does plating in a fine dining restaurant. That's not to say you don't have stations collaborating on dishes, like you have an entremet or veg station and a roast station, where the roast station's doing the sauce and the protein, and the entremet station's doing the sliced vegetables and the puree, but they pass their mise en place to the collective centralized pass, and then the plating happens with however many you're picking up, and then those finished plates get sent to front of house. And so it's a little bit off. It's like, it's correct that timing happens in kitchens to make sure that everything is efficient, but it's not done in the way that Carmen just outlined, where you want a dish to move from station to station in 5 seconds. That doesn't happen. Not trying to ruin Carmen and Claire's moment here, but, you know, that'd just be a bunch of wasted movements, don't you think? Just seems really inefficient to me. I don't know. We'll let them keep doing their thing. I'll see you in their next episode.